Carthage must be destroyed, and today we are on our next video for the Hail Caesar walkthrough that I've been doing. We are going to start break tests. We're going to get into what break tests are, when you have to take a break test. We will probably look at some of the break tests that happen when we do range and how to deal with retreats and the like. So let us begin. So what is a break test? A break test is basically how a unit responds to danger or something bad that has happened to them, putting them in layman's terms there. Basically, a break test can happen from either getting shot at, and they can also happen when you are in the middle of fighting, you know, maybe your side is losing, maybe you've taken too many casualties and people need to start to run, maybe they got shot at and their best friends next to them were unfortunately slain. There could be many reasons that you have to take a break test. The main break tests are always going to come from either melee or from shooting. In the game, however, you could also have, if you have an umpire or a scenario, there could be scenarios or situations that cause a break test. Like maybe you guys have an earthquake occur, a random earthquake occurs in the game, or maybe there's flooding, or maybe there's an eclipse, the rulebook states, for an example. You know, maybe there's an omen or something in the Greek world that happens and it spooks people, and you have to take a break test. The very last group of break tests I mentioned there aren't written into the rules, and you can make them up per scenario. But basically, what we're going to talk about is the ranged break tests and the melee break tests in the following videos. So let's talk about the ranged break tests. When do you have to take a break test when a ranged attack happens? Well, if your unit becomes shaken by ranged attacks, it has to take a break test. If your unit becomes shaken and they also take casualties while being shaken, they have to take a break test. If a enemy is shooting at you and they require a 5 or less, basically anything less than a 6 to hit you, it requires a 6 to cause a break test. And if you require 6s to hit an enemy, you need 2 6s to cause a break test. This is also applied to traversing and closing shots. The exact same rules apply, and we went through that earlier, so I won't get too much into that. I also don't have archers or long-range weapons to even really accurately represent this. As for hand-to-hand combat, when you usually take a break test, it's going to be in the melee, obviously, right? So it's going to be happening when you have to see if you're, number one, defeated in hand-to-hand combat. Okay, every time a unit per fighting round is defeated, they have to do a break test. The other time that you're going to have a break test is if you are shaken in combat and you drew the combat. You had a draw in the combat. I don't know if that's the right verb, the past tense verb, but if there's a draw in the combat, then there will be a break test involved for the person that draws if they're shaken. And finally, if a unit is in support and the unit they're supporting breaks or shatters, any supporting unit that was supporting that broken fighting unit will also take a break test. So there's a number of different methods that you could take a break test in Hail Caesar. Okay, and I will just show you guys very basically here how a break test might look. Let's do shooting first. Let's look at these light infantry. We got light infantry here facing up against some hastati there. And let's do the ranged attacks here first, okay? These guys don't have a long-range weapon, but they have short-range attack values, and break tests, no matter if it's short or long, will use a break test result. It doesn't matter. There's no difference between short and range attacks for the break tests. There is a break test table. I'm not going to share it with everyone here. You'll have to get the books to see it. But the break tests have two kinds of tables. They have a break test from ranged attacks table and a break test from melee attacks table, okay? Each table has 3 different parts per section, per column. It depends how you look at the table. It could be column or row. But there's basically infantry, which are these guys here. Any infantry that can form a line, which means light infantry, medium infantry, and heavy infantry. All of them will have to look at the infantry section of the break test tables. There's also cavalry, and that covers horses, elephants, chariots, and camels. So if this elephant has to take a break test, it'll be looking at that part of the tables. And finally, there's skirmishers, and skirmishers are a little different. Skirmishers are a little light. They're lightly armored. They have no armor, so they're not as brave or as stable as light, medium, or heavy, so they have a lesser value. They have their own value on the break test table. Skirmishes also cover baggage and civilians if you've put them into your games, if you put them into your scenarios. I should also mention that infantry isn't just light, medium, and heavy infantry for the break test. It's also artillery crew. Okay, so yeah, that's also included into the infantry category. So very basically, let me show you what a ranged, we're going to start with ranged today. I'll probably show you some melee too, but we'll talk more in depth about the melee in another video, I think. But let's look at the ranged here today. This unit here, they have a short range value of 2 dice, and in their ranged attack part of the turn, they're going to roll. They're going to roll against these Romans. Now, Romans are heavy infantry with shields. So normally you need a 4, 5, and 6 at short range to hit someone with a ranged attack. But because they have the shields in the front, they got a morale save to range attack. So it's going to be a 5 and 6 to hit these guys. So if I require a 5 and 6 to hit them, that means I need to get a single 6 to cause a break test. And if these guys say we're shaken or something, that's another -1 to hit for ranged. It would mean that they need 6s to hit these guys. That means I'd have to roll 2 6s on this dice to cause a break test. So let's roll. I didn't roll a 6, but I did roll a hit. And then the Romans would have to save to see if they save a wound, but no break test was caused because I didn't have a 6 rolled there, okay? If it had been a 6, the Romans would have taken a break test. Or alternatively, let's say the Romans had 4 wounds on them. On small units, 4 casualties on them. On small units, 4 is usually the stamina value. On standard, you'll usually see 6. Let's say that they're at 4, they're shaken, and if they take any ranged casualties, they'll be taking a break test. We roll there, we know they have to take 5s, and they rolled a 5. If the Romans save this, and they do, but let's say it flips to 3, let's say they don't save. A break test, when you get shot at, if you're shot at and just become shaken in a break test, you just do a straight up break test. But if you're shot at and they fail this wound and they go to 5 here, you subtract the difference from your max stamina value to see if they break or not. So their stamina value is 4, they're shaken. If they reached the shaken value, they would take the test unmodified. But because it's 1 extra wound above their stamina value, they're going to -1 on the charts, okay? And then what you do, how you actually test the break test, and this counts for both melee and for ranged, is you take 2 dice, 2d6, you roll them, and then you add up the total. Here we got a 9. These guys lost 1 casualty from shooting, so that would be 9 minus 1. If they lost 2, you'd -2 from this result. 3 minus 3, right? So they get a 9 minus 1 would be 8. And I won't show you the chart here, but infantry, on the break test chart, if they rolled an 8, it says here that they would hold their ground without penalty, okay? They're not going to move, they're not going to panic, they're not going to react to that. Now, if they had taken, say, these guys here had some way to cause 3 casualties to them when they're shaken, it would be -3, and the result would be a 6. That would be much different. That means that they would hold their ground, but they would be disordered, or they could choose to retreat in good order. And we'll go over the different things that may happen to them from break tests in a moment here. So, what happened there was that these guys rolled an 8, as you just saw, from the values that they took. Now, normally, if you look at the charts, you'll see a bunch of different, and I got my book here to just read it off because I can't memorize all the different things, but normally what happens is if you took a range attack test, a break test, and you'll roll on the dice to see the results, there's different things that could happen. So, different things can happen from the range attack test results. You could have to hold your ground without penalty. That just means they're standing there, they took some damage, maybe they got shaken up a bit, whatever, but they're not fleeing or retreating. Sometimes they may retreat in good order. Retreating means that you move once in the opposite quarter from where the shooters have shot at you. So if these guys had their break test and they had to retreat in good order, they'd have to move back, which would be 6 inches here. Okay, if the cavalry here took it, they'd be moving 9 back because that's their light infantry formed value. The elephant would be 6 back, these guys would be 6 as well because they're infantry. So retreating in good order just means you move in the opposite quarter of where the shooting came from. If there was a friend here behind them and they had to retreat, it's a little different. What happens is that they move as far as they can go up to their friend, and if they can't make their full movement, they become disordered. So if people retreat in good order and have to move back, but they have a friend or terrain or obstacle that doesn't allow them to retreat back, they'll become disordered if they can't make that full move. There's also retreat disordered, which is another result, which is exactly as I just described. If they have to retreat, they'll become disordered during the retreat. There's also hold your ground disordered. They may become disordered and not move back. Finally, the last three and the bad results are break. And the first one here would be break if shaken. If these guys have become shaken from shooting or are shaken, and they roll as a result, they're just gone. The break means you take them off the table, they run away, they all die, or they go home, you know. There's also break if the unit has suffered any casualties. Maybe they rolled a 6, okay? This is very unlucky, but maybe these guys rolled a 6, caused 1 casualty to that unit, and they rolled as a result. That means they're fleeing, they're running away, even if they're shaken or not, okay? And the last poorest result you can possibly get is break. If you break, they're gone, they just run away, they die. It's very, very unlucky, and not often that they'll just straight up break. They usually take damage first, but you never know, you might roll snake eyes. If you roll snake eyes, they break. so those are the different range attack results that can happen. It's a little different for fighting, because instead of a retreat value, a moving of a unit's movement value, fighting and melee will use give ground, which has a maximum amount any unit can move, which is 6 inches, but we'll go through that another time. One thing I should add here that's very important, I'm going to push these cavalrymen back, but let's go back to the ranged values here. When you are rolling for 6s to see if you cause a break test or not, per turn a unit can only take 1 break test from shooting, from ranged, okay? That means if multiple units are shooting at the Roman unit, they all have to roll to hit first before any break tests are done. You have to take all units that are targeting a specific unit first, do all the rolls, and then see if they break or not. So how does that look like, okay? We know this elephant has a short range value. Well, actually, they often have a bow on some units, but let's say they have a short range value here of just 1, okay? And these guys here have 2. So we know they have 2 dice, and they have 1 dice, and they have 2 dice here. Now, these guys all have to shoot at the same target here if they want to, and they say, yes, let's do it. Again, these are heavy infantry units shooting at the front, so these guys need a 5 and a 6. You roll a 1 off camera there, that's cheating. Let's roll a 5. They take 1 point of damage if they don't save it. These guys here then roll, and oh, there's a 6. We know we have 2 hits here. You work out the hits, the saves first, to see if these guys become shaken or damaged, because if they become shaken and have to take a break test, it doesn't matter if you rolled 6s or not. So you have to check to see if they become shaken first. In this case, they're not going to be, I already know. They save 1, they take a point of damage. Now, they took 1 casualty there. They're not shaken. They need to be at 4 to be shaken. But because you rolled a 6, and I didn't require 6s to hit, I only need 1 6, the Romans do have to take a break test. And that would be a 6 total here. You don't subtract this casualty from this total because these guys are not shaken. If they are shaken, that's when you remove casualties from the test result in ranged, okay? So their total would be 6 here. 6 on infantry isn't the best thing from getting shot at, but it's not the worst. It says you're giving it says that you should be. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong chart here. The charts are in the book if you guys want to check them. It says hold your ground disordered or retreat in good order. So the Romans have a choice here. They could sit here and decide that they're disordered, which is bad, and I'll tell you why in a bit. Or they could retreat in good order and do something next turn. If they're disordered, they won't be able to react or move or anything in the next part of their turn. So yeah, you only roll or you only subtract the casualties from the range test results if they become shaken. If they take a wound like that and aren't shaken, then you don't subtract any results. So I would like to talk about retreating. And like I said, retreating is a move away from enemies. Usually it's going to be directly away from the person that shot at them. So if these guys were here and they took a break test and were told to retreat, it would just be 6 inches back for them because that's 1 movement from infantry. A retreat is 1 movement back. If it was cavalry, in closed order like that, and they're light cavalry, it'd be 9 inches. If they were open order, it'd be 12. So sometimes some units can go really quick if they do a retreat. If you are retreating, ideally, like I said, it's best to go away from the opposite quarter. However, if say they were here and they were both getting shot at, it may make more sense to retreat directly back this way instead of this way from the guys that scored the break test value from last time. Instead, both units were shooting at them, so it's probably ideal just to retreat from both of them. Another thing to consider also is you can actually retreat if shot at from something that's a bigger threat. Like, let's say that these guys are lined up like this, and these light infantry scored a hit on them. Now, you could opt, and this could be an umpire decision or a mutual decision. You could in game say, well, right now the elephant's the bigger threat than these light infantry here, or maybe they're skirmishers or something, they can't charge. But this is the bigger threat. You can actually choose to retreat more so away from the bigger threat. So if you get shot at, and there's something closer that's more scarier, you can actually retreat from the thing scarier than the thing that was shooting at you, the thing that's more dangerous. All right. Typically that won't happen, though. I find that if you get shot at, especially in the Punic War and Roman era, it's usually going to be directly in the opposite direction of what shot at you. Also, if you are retreating, proximity still applies. So these guys are here and they say, okay, we got shot at, we're going to retreat back. As long as they're within 12 inches of an enemy, the proximity rule is still going to apply. You're not going to have them turn around or turn off somewhere else. For short range attacks, that's generally going to be the case. For infantry, if they move 6 inches back, they're not going to do any extra moves or anything like that. Long range usually don't have to worry about proximity if they're far enough away, but you never know, they could be close enough within 12 inches that it does happen. The other thing here to point out too is you could if you want to, if you do a retreat, move through your own friends. This is another option. Let's say that the cavalry are behind them and they have to retreat. These Romans could opt to retreat through them. Now, if a unit has to retreat through their friends, that means that the unit retreating, moving through their friends, automatically become disordered. They have no choice, okay? If they move through these guys will have to test to see if they're disordered, just like moving through units in the normal turn. We went through that earlier. I won't go through it again. But in an earlier video, we talk about moving through other units and the like. So yeah, if you do retreat through your friends as a result of a range attack, the unit retreating will become automatically disordered, and the unit that it moves through may also become disordered if tested. And that's not good if you're close up, because that means your order and your initiative will be screwed. And one final note, if say these guys were enemies behind them and they had to retreat, if they retreat up to the enemy or close to them, they're not automatically destroyed, but they will become disordered. So enemies in terrain are probably your biggest fear if they're behind you, or your own friends if you have to move through them. At least if you move through your own friends, they'll pop out disordered. They might not be disordered, and then at least you still have things to operate with and can survive. So let's talk about disordered. You know, there's not a lot of action in today's video, not many units because it's me mostly talking, but let's talk about the disordered status here, because that comes up in break test, and oftentimes in break tests the disordered is going to come up because disordered often happens from a break test result, be it melee or ranged. So disordered is when your units are basically no longer coherent, or they're messed up, they have something that has happened to the unit and they're confused for a moment, okay? So disordered causes a number of negative things to your units. The main thing and the horrible thing of disordered is that they cannot take any orders. That's the one thing that makes disorder bad. They can no longer receive orders during the command turn of their phase. They can also not act on initiative. So if you're disordered, you're basically not moving in your turn of the game. There are some special rules in the game that some units have that they can test at the start of the turn to see if they can shake off disordered. Otherwise, if your unit is disordered, the disorder will disappear at the end of your own turn. So if these guys were disordered by these two units like we did before, and that was their turn when they're shooting, on to the next turn of the Romans, they would still be disordered. At the end of the next Roman turn, that's when they lose the disordered status. Now, there is some exceptions to this rule. If a unit is in close combat and becomes disordered, they do not lose the disordered value. You only lose the disordered value if you are not engaged. That means as a support or fighting. So if these Romans and these cavalrymen behind them were all disordered and it's the end of the Romans' turn, they don't lose the disordered value because they're still engaged. Okay, well, we're going to go through this a little more in depth soon, but if let's say on the flip side that the support unit of light infantry here and the elephant here are disordered and they have to give ground as a break test result, we'll talk about the melee in the next video. If they have to give ground and they're disordered and the Romans decide to follow up as their victorious move, we'll talk about those two, and the supports follow. If that happens, the engagement was never cut off. They gave ground and these guys continued. These guys are still disordered. They do not lose their disordered value until they're not in an engagement and until the end of their turn. So you have to not be a support or fighting unit. In an engagement, you have to be sitting outside of an engagement, and it has to be the end of your turn for it to wear off. Other than the initiative and order moves not being allowed to be given to units when they're disordered. Disorder will also cause -1 to shooting and -1 to hit enemies. So in this case here, these guys are fighting. When they're fighting this enemy, they're not able to hit as well. They're going to be -1 to their dice rolls because they are disordered. And remember, disorder and shaken do not stack. It's just -1 either or. So, and just to wrap up today's video, the disorder can also happen from certain reactions in game, like if cavalry countercharge an infantry charge, the infantry will automatically become disordered. Or if cavalry charge units that have long spears on the front, for example, like say these cavalrymen were fighting, I don't know, some triarii, and the triarii, I should have brought them out, but let's say the cavalrymen charge some triarii head on the front, the triarii might cause them to be disordered because of their long spears, okay? So certain rules may cause disorder, but that's all in the special rules section, or we've gone through it already in melee. And finally, disorder may happen if you have scenarios and the umpires again. Remember we talked about break tests happening from earthquakes and scenario-based things. Maybe there's a landslide or something. You may decide that a unit becomes automatically disordered or something like that. That's all scenario-based, and you can build on that yourself. There's no set rules for that. But the important thing is just to remember that disordered affects your initiative, your orders given. You won't be able to do them, and it also affects melee values and shooting values as well. Alright, well that's all we're going to do today just for this video, not to make it too long. In the next video we're going to go through hand-to-hand combat a little more in depth, and the results, which are very similar, a little different than retreating and moving around and stuff like that. Giving ground is different, we'll talk about that. We'll also go through uphill advantage and artillery. We got a few more things to go through in the break test, so maybe 2 more videos to this. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys on the next one. Please like and subscribe if you like this content, and we'll keep making more. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.